예, 반갑습니다.
Welcome back. In the interest of time, we will like to proceed right away. We just heard 5 presentations, and now we will have about 30 minutes to discuss the presentations with 2 new panel members. And let me introduce the panelists. We have Mr. Gyeong Su, Senior Research Fellow of Busan Development Institute. So he is a member of a number of different organizations. He's quite famous in Busan. And we also have Mr. Chun Kyung-ho, Curator of National Maritime Museum of Korea. He mainly focuses on maritime culture, fishing village, and fishing technology. I would like to give the microphone to Mr. Gyeong Su first.
네, 방금
Good afternoon. My name is Gyeong Su with Busan Development Institute. Well, we are seeing the development of the Gadeokdo New Airport. And for many decades, including the civic groups, we made huge efforts in order to see this possibility. But looking at the presentations and listening to the discussions, I believe that there is something that we're not quite the same when it comes to the points that we agree with. So I might not be articulate, but for the next 5 minutes, I'd like to talk about this. In 1990, we saw the peak of the number of population. Well, the official document says that the peak was in 1995, but it was actually 1990. And the number of population was 3.9 million, which is almost double the figure in Incheon. And currently, it's 3.3 million, and in Incheon, we have 3 million people. So for the past 3 decades, why did we see such a change? And we have about 51 million people in Korea, and we went past the peak. So if you think about when we had, well, if you add the population in Incheon and Gyeonggi, it's about 8.7 million people. So are these figures okay? And if you think about local areas, well, maybe we can go as far as saying that these local areas are not really included in the figures for the nation, and we are developing this 5th runway, and it seems like we're only focused on developing all the facilities in the metropolitan area. I believe that we have to take on a different view. And when I serve as the commissioner of the committee, I always say that we have to have a different view. So from the presentation, it was already covered, and someone said that Incheon suffered because starting from 1990s, in 6,000 Pyong area, well, that is actually 200 square meters, and these were developed. And at the time, if you think about what happened at the time, and now, if you see the number of population that's decreasing. And in Busan, we do not have available resources. Last year, I had this Gadeokdo Air City planned. I was involved in this, and I believe that's why I'm invited. And also in Nucha area, I already gave a presentation, and I asked them to come up with a clear direction. So with the Gadeokdo Airport, with all the noise, well, we do not really have an available land, because in the hinterland we have this new airport and all the green industrial zone. So the Nucha area was the sole available area. So what we can think about is the only concerns we have is noise. And at the time, whenever we develop airports, it's not like we built just an airstrip. Since 2000, all the cities or all the nations pursue comprehended air complex or airport complex. But if you think about the size, it's only 1/10 of what Incheon has. So I talked about 200 square meters. And I don't know if this can be feasible and economically profitable, but from the airport, we would need an accommodation like a business hotel, but we do not have a site for that. So looking at the presentations, I also understand that we need to conserve cultural heritages. And I'm involved in the planning portion, in planning part. In building the greens, in securing the greens in order to protect the nature. But still, I'm all for development. So let me just give you an example. Well, I was one of the people who prepared this expo-related materials, and in Gangsa area, and we are talking about this new development site, and I was opposed to this development. Even though we have a huge number of population, I argued that we have to go to the North Port because all the piers were developed by the Japanese people during the colonial era. But the hinterland have become slums. And 30%, more than 30% of the population are old age population. So I argued that the hinterland should be developed, and that's why the expo was relocated. So even though we have only 1 month away from the results of this selection of the expo sites, but I'm all for conservation. It's not just about building the airstrip and worrying about noise. I'm not saying that it is development versus conservation, but it has to be something we have to live off. And I'm planning another comprehensive city complex that is 10 times bigger than Busan. So we have to think about what benefits this airport can bring about and for who. So whether it be digital and restoration. Well, about all this information, this is included in the plan, and also securing the park site is included as well. And whenever we develop an airport, there is this noise issue, and which will mean that villages have to be relocated. So we need sites. You can't just tell them to leave and do nothing about it. So those who are living on Gadeokdo Island, in order to build a complex, well, some of the people have to move again because of this new airport. My wife's family also is in this area, and with the new port, well, my wife's family had to move again. And in the new port, my son joined the company in the new port. So it gave us a job, but my family had to leave the place as a result at the same time. So it's not just about the content of the development, and we have to have a broader view. Thank you. So we have to see it from the bigger perspective. Thank you very much for your message.
And next, Mr. Chun Kyung-ho, curator of the National Maritime Museum of Korea. Yes, I am Chun Kyung-ho, as introduced. Well, I'm not sure if I'm actually qualified to be a panel discussing the presentations, but as a working level personnel, I want to look at how the new airport and the lives of the Gadeokdo residents, and I'm sure that's why you invited me as a panel. So I fully agree with all of the comments, and also the comment from Mr. Kim just now. The matter of development and preservation is a difficult one to tackle. My basis comes from folklore and culture, so I am more of a preservationist than a developmentalist. So the spatial value of Gadeokdo and the resident of Gadeokdo is what I want to touch upon. The lives of the villagers have been introduced many times throughout the presentation, so I don't see the need to be redundant. But with the airport and the new port coming online, the lives of Gadeokdo had to suffer a big crisis because they lost all the cards. And although they were compensated, that money was used to pay back debt, and they practically lost homes and they lost jobs, or they had to work as daily laborers of factories. And this comes from study results. And I was interested in bullet fishing, and I went to Gadeokdo last year for research. And a new airport in Gadeokdo is a national project, so the villagers say that they have no choice but to accept the plan. But on the other hand, they are very sad about losing their villages, the fact that they will be losing their long-time homes. So although they accept the airport as a national plan, the fact that the fishing culture will be lost and the community culture, the food, the values, the entire community culture may be lost, as Ms. Hwang has mentioned, and we need to think about this. And secondly, the spatial value of Gadeokdo. To travel abroad, we may have to go to Gadeokdo Airport as a pass-through point, but this is a very place where people had their lives and homes, and that space will be lost. And I want to highlight the values of this space and how the people of Gadeokdo felt and what kind of lives they have led. So at minimum, we need to preserve their life records and show the public. So these are the points I wanted to mention. And the issue of preservation and development is always a tough one to answer. And we heard about the 70%, 140% effect being reachable. Well, so far, this is theoretical. We don't know which way would be the right way, but we definitely need to think deeply between humanities experts and the developers, and through a roundtable, we need to look for the best way forward for the success of the Busan citizens, Gadeokdo Airport, and the villagers of Gadeokdo. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chun, for your comment. We have heard the comments from our panels. Rather than giving a direct comment, I think the comments were quite comprehensive. So we have 16 minutes left. So following the order of presentation, I'd like to give each speaker 3 minutes to add to your presentation. Starting with Mr. Liu.
이사님께서 먼저 시작을 해주시면 좋을 것 같습니다.
Yes, I proposed a round table, comprehensive. There are many different round tables around the world, and there are not many cases of having a successful round table in Korea. With this big project of Gadeokdo New Airport, we have many stakeholders and lots of conflicting issues. So why don't we have a very successful roundtable in Busan so that we can create a value for this new airport in Gadeokdo. Gadeokdos have a strong brand value, and it can coexist with the new airport in Busan. And I believe that we are blessed with the natural environment to make it happen. And if you think about the quality of cards, it's top quality. So I believe that this is something we can pursue. And this is not just for cards, but it's basically about creating a culture of coexistence, and this can be a symbolic example so that we can diversify the value of a new airport. So Gadeokdo New Airport, we can actually create a beautiful story for this airport where travelers around the world can enjoy great food and the long history of Gadeokdo Island. And I hope that this can be an opportunity for us to resolve many issues. I gave you some examples of Japan. And when we talked about the status of Busan, well, we talked about how we can learn some lessons from the cases of Japan. So it's not just about which nation it is, but it's about establishing an identity for Busan Airport. That is what we have to consider, and I think this can be a discussion point at a round table. Thank you. Ms. Huang, please.
The future of Busan is on stake, so that is a large statement, and I think that is in line with my presentation. What I wanted to say is that with the new airport constructed, there are many shadows that come with the airport, and the most serious issue was changes in the marine ecosystem and the possible disasters that may arise. And we heard also about the tangible and intangible heritages, the cultural heritages that should be safeguarded. But the lives of people who live there, the history of these people were never mentioned. So I just wanted to mention that point. With the new port, 2 villages were disintegrated, as well as their culture and history. Nature is able to restore itself, and I agree that nature should be restored, but I'm not sure, and I don't think that culture and history, once lost, can be restored, because once lost in memory, there's no possibility of ever restoring culture and history into its original form. So from a humanities perspective, I wanted to record the history of the sea and Gadeokdo people. And it's a very difficult topic to entangle with the topic of development and preservation. I wanted to say that we need to take a middle path and set a future direction. And I wasn't speaking from a strategic response. I wanted to say that we need to start recording the lives of the people right away and find a way to do this right now. And so the history of the lives of Gadeokdo people was anything but easy, and they can present a good starting point for our future, because the natural dyeing technique is receiving limelight globally. And this actually was a part of the Gadeokdo culture. So the knowledge that the people of Gadeokdo had, the intangible knowledge in particular, are very valuable. Beyond this being a storytelling ingredient. And we can find actually an alternative starting point to the industries that we have. And this is not up for discussion. We need to start recording right away and documenting their lives. And this doesn't involve a large budget either. When we build the airport, we need to think of what the ultimate vision is. And depending on the vision, we can fully do this. without asking these questions in the policymaking process and not having the right message go out, well, I wasn't sure whether this can be a policy decision based on a long-term sustainability. So rather than wasting time from two extreme ends of the need to start right away recording what will be soon lost. And with a very specific records, we need to talk about preservation. Thank you.
감사합니다. 다음
Thank you. Professor Kim Gi-soo, please. Thank you. Well, just like two speakers mentioned, I absolutely agree with what they said. And in resolving this issue, I believe that we need capacity of the local communities when it comes to development and conservation or preservation. I believe that we had similar experiences over and over. So, in dealing with such issues and in documenting such history and how can we keep values, we can actually find examples from other areas. And history shows that we did have some thoughts around these topics, and we can learn from our past experiences. And I believe that utilizing these experiences, we can come up with a better answer. Well, someone mentioned that the roundtable was not very helpful, but from the roundtables, I was involved in these roundtable discussions, and well, you might say that these were not very beneficial, but throughout the process of having such roundtables, the messages we got were valuable. Well, it wasn't adopted, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it was meaningless just because it was not adopted. So when it comes to development versus conservation, we do have experiences and we do have techniques with which we can resolve this issue. So instead of looking at this issue from two extremely divided opinions, we have to be well aware of the time limit. And once we have the development process, we are likely to be swayed by a specific process. So before that happens, I believe it's helpful for a local community to have the discussions in advance. Thank you.
이제 외국 사례
Next, we heard about the Japanese case by Professor Lee, and your final comments, please. Yes. As I am working for Incheon National University, whenever I come to Busan, I often feel that I become a public enemy because I often have to talk about the Seoul metropolitan city area, and when I do that, the response I get is, "Are you ignoring Busan?" But what I was really wanted to convey was that, well, my hometown is here, and I just work in Incheon. So from my heart, I really wish for the future development of Busan, and that's why I wanted to share a few thoughts today. So Incheon also keeps saying and comparing itself to Seoul because Incheon is located right next to Seoul and is very sensitive about being discriminated against. But I hear same stories in Busan. So yes, that may be true, partially, but I think Incheon should have its own values and Busan should have its own values as well. What kind of objective, what kind of future strategy and vision does Busan have in mind to? That should be the key in building an airport, and about the histories and natures that could be lost along the way. How do we preserve and save them? One more case from Japan. inside the airport terminal in Japan, all the animals, the architecture forms are preserved as copied models in the terminal. So as we develop the Gadeokdo Airport, we also need to talk about how to preserve the history and the living organisms. And I also mentioned Gangseo Belt, the entire Busan area. Just like in Cheon or other cases, should make sure that the municipalities do not undergo experience the same challenges. We need to start talking about how to go through a successful path rather than the dichotomy of preservation versus development. So we have gathered humanists here. For that very reason, I believe we need to pool experts and pool the wisdom and ideas for this local region. And for that to happen, rather than dividing between Seoul and the provincial regions, let's just have Busan in our minds.
다음 홍콩 신공항 건설에 따른
Thank you. Next, Professor Seo, please. Listening to other speakers, well, how we need to have a roundtable, well, I agree with that, and I don't need to repeat that. Well, within this big national event, we have this event in a local area, and I believe that there are many other issues that we need to have along with this national event. And the key word for this forum is blue technomy, the environment, ecosystem, and the development of the new airport. And how can we build an airport without destroying the nature? How can we make it an eco-friendly one? And I told you how the case of Hong Kong and how the airport in Hong Kong was built with the reclamation of the land. And we have this technological issue, blue technology, and also from the keynote session of Jeremy Rifkin, resilience was emphasized. I'm not focusing on development, but resilience is something that we need to bear in mind when we pursue development of this huge infrastructure. And we also have to factor in the history and culture of the human race. So this is not something that can be handled by the humanities scholars only. We need technicians, we need other stakeholders as well. And the major player would be the local communities, not the government, not the central government, but it should be the local community, Busan people, for example. So I believe that the development of the new airport and the 2030 Expo will be a great opportunity for us so that we can be more equipped with the capability. Thank you. Thank you very much. So it is a venue, an opportunity where we jointly discuss the future of Busan and challenges of Busan. We have 1 or 2 more minutes. So if we have a question from the floor, maybe we can spend some time for that.
We are talking about the historical and cultural, ecological heritage of Gadeokdo, and shedding a new light on this was very meaningful, and I think that this should not be the end. We need to translate this into a tangible result. And I hope that everyone here could maybe launch a task force so that educational and learning materials can be published. there are many relics and historic sites that are not noticeable. Although Busan wants to develop its tourism, Busan is so ignorant about culture and history, and I think that the city government is really doing this the wrong way. And secondly, the presenters and among discussants, I wanted to point out one of your comments. First, from the Busan Development Institute, you said that the gap between Incheon and Busan, and you attributed that to the airport and said that Incheon was able to develop through the airport, but that's not true. Incheon was able to develop with trade with China as Korea normalized relations with China during the Do-tae government. Companies that export to China has to go to those regions to save logistics cost. And during President Nomuhyun, about 10 new cities were developed. The first new cities were bed towns. If they were bed towns, then the Seoul city wouldn't have such developed in a sprawling manner. But provincial companies were all sucked into the Seoul region. So I think everything comes down to policy. So for Busan to do well, I think trade with Japan and exports to Japan should be revitalized and bolstered so that exporting companies that export to Japan would come to Busan. So the political logic cannot beat the economic logic. No matter how much regulation is placed in the Seoul metropolitan area, it is not enough to block all the companies flocking to the Seoul metropolitan area. And secondly, the Hong Kong airport. You said that it resembles Kim Hae Airport, but Hong Kong Airport is out on the sea, whereas Kim Hae Airport is on land. So to say that Kim Hae Airport is not safe is that Hong Kong Airport is offshore and takeoff is okay, but landing may be risky. Well, I think that is more in what we have, more of the situation we have in Gadeokdo. But the 100% of the airport site for Gadeokdo is reclaimed, so it is not as risky. So just to clarify, thank you. Thank you very much for your comments. Yes, we would love to continue on with this discussion, but we do have another session this afternoon, and it is time to conclude. The Marine Humanities session will now come to an end. Thank you for your participation. Thank you. Thank you very much. It is now time to conclude the Marine Humanities session. To the panel and to the moderator, I'd like to ask you to remain on stage for the photo session, for a group photo.
네, 그럼 이것으로 공식
And with that, we come to an official end of the Marine Humanities session. The next session starts at 4:30. See you back here then. Thank you.